Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadesha Tarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchikalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Right, very good. So let us begin by with an introduction. Let's have a look at where we stand, where we've come from, where we're going, just before we enter into this the chapter itself. So, as we mentioned, we're at the end of the second group of 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. And, well, we'll see. Arjuna wants to hear more about bhakti. At the beginning of this whole section, chapter 7, the very first verse, if you remember, was so very explicit and clear about devotional service and pure devotional service. So, and then since then, of course, the 8th chapter, well, it was also bringing the focus on pure devotional service while examining the subject of leaving this body from different perspectives. Then the 9th chapter, very much about devotional service. 10th, end of the 9th chapter, beginning of the 10th. Oh, how rich and beautiful those verses and the purports, just amazing. Krishna revealing his heart. And then 11th chapter, well, we just finished, pretty spectacular. But again, bringing out devotional service. And so here again, sort of summarizing this section, you could say, and really just bringing out again the beauty, the wonder of pure devotional service. So yeah, so Arjuna wants to hear again about pure devotional service. And so he begins, as we'll see in a couple of minutes, he begins by asking a question he's asked on a number of occasions. Basically, what's better, impersonalism or personalism? Yeah, that's a number of times that has come up, and Krishna's given clear answers, but again it's going to happen. So Krishna clarifies strongly, really clarifies very strongly, that the devotees are best, the process of devotional service is best. And everything about Krishna consciousness is better than anything about impersonalism or any process to do with impersonalism, or even any indirect type of process which has a little bit of Krishna consciousness sort of on the side or whatever like that. So yeah, in a sense, we're summing up here about bhakti. There'll be further summing up in the 18th chapter, the last chapter of the whole book. But here there's a type of summing up about bhakti. Yes. So, well, anyway, the 7th chapter was Maya Saktamana. You got to focus your mind. You got to and act in Krishna consciousness. And you've got to do what? Touch Trinu. You've got to hear. You've got to hear. Very foundational. 8th chapter, remember Lord Krishna at the time of death, achieve him. 9th chapter, the glory of the process, the glory of the devotees and the Lord. 10th chapter, encouraging devotional service through the Chatushloki Bhagavad Gita and all the different opulences which inspire anyone, any devotee, but particularly the neophytes, that wow, Krishna's like, Krishna is wow. And then 11th chapter demonstrating the opulences and again stressing pure bhakti. So here in the last purport, verse 20, Prabhupada says, in this chapter, from verse 2 through the end, from Maya Vesha Manoye Mam, fixing the mind on me, through Ye tu Dharmam Ritam Idam, this religion of eternal engagement, the Supreme has explained the process of devotional service for approaching him. Such processes are very dear to the Lord, and he accepts a person engaged in them. Very nice. What can we say? Let me just drink a little water here. Okay, so let's now, before we just dive into the whole chapter, let's just have a look at the sections. Like we said earlier, just now, there are 3 very distinct sections. They're really clear and they're really kind of clearly different from each other, all under the heading very much of pure devotional service. So first section, which is what we're going to go through tonight, is from chapter 1 to chapter 7, and the subject matter again is bhakti over impersonalism. Bhakti is superior. Then the second section, B, is from verse 8 to verse 12. And it's called, we call it, progressive stages of devotion. Progressive stages of devotion. And it's a very interesting analysis of different levels in Krishna consciousness, beginning with the highest and coming down to the lowest. It's interesting. That we'll do, we assume, tomorrow night. And then finally, the third section, verse 13 to verse 20, qualities which endear one to Krishna. Qualities which, if you have them, Krishna appreciates, and he appreciates you for having them. Yes. And they make Krishna willing or happy to accept you. Okay. So we begin. The first section, verse 1 to verse 7, bhakti over impersonalism. And there are subsections here. First subsection is verse 1 and verse 2. Yeah. And the idea there is the devotee is more perfect and advances much more easily than an impersonalist, And this is because of the devotee's intimate relationship with Krishna. So first of all, as we'll see with verses 1 and 2, that one who fixes his mind on Krishna and worships him and serves him with great faith is more perfect than one who worships the impersonal feature of the Absolute. All right, so let us read these two verses first of all. Number 1, Arjuna inquired, which are considered to be more perfect, those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested? Well, it's the same question in slightly different clothes. You know, we all wear different clothes every day, but it's the same person. So it's the same question, but just kind of a slightly different perspective, or not even really perspective, just a slightly different way of putting it. And question 2, and verse 2, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, those who fix their minds on my personal form and are always engaged in worshiping me with great and transcendental faith are considered by me to be most perfect. Well, you know, let us hand it to Krishna. Let us admit, you couldn't make it much clearer, could you? That is just clear. You want a straight answer to a straight question, you got it. All right. So let's go through verse 1, go through the purport. There's a fair amount of things there we should look at. So verse 1, Arjuna inquired, which are considered to be more perfect, those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested? Yeah, so it's revisiting, as we said, in a slightly different sort of guise, or, you know, clothed slightly differently, the old question of inaction or action, devotional service, or an analytical process. You know, it's the same idea in different ways. The same processes are being compared. And these things have been discussed, particularly in chapter 3, chapter 5, and chapter 6, and other places, but perhaps most vividly in those early chapters, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur makes an interesting point. He says that Arjuna is asking simply because he wants to hear more about the superiority of bhakti. Yeah. You know, it's sort of like, arguably, sometimes if you are a follower of a certain, like, sports team, for example, and your sports team wins a match and you're very excited and like that, then you may like to read the report a number of times, not just once, but a few times, to read how they won and how your favorite players did this and that. This sort of thing happens sometimes. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that Arjuna Of course, he doesn't need it. We need it. He doesn't really need it. But he just wants to hear again, just see, bhakti is superior. How wonderful. And the way he's presenting it, of course, the way he is presenting it, he is asking, who are better? It's just a different way of putting the same thing. As they say, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Or as we say sometimes in kind of English slang, the same difference. The same difference. So, which are considered more perfect? Those who are properly engaged. He puts it so nicely. Pari upasate. Pari upasate. Upasate means to worship or engage in devotional service. And pari upasate means to do it very nicely. Yes, so who are more perfect? Those who are always properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman. So Srila Prabhupada notes, in the first paragraph, you can see there, Lord Krishna has already explained, up to this point, about the personal, the impersonal, the universal, different types of devotees, different types of yogis, quite a few varieties. However, as Prabhupada continues in that first paragraph, when we talk about transcendentalists, then there are basically 2 categories, the personalists and the impersonalists. There are different varieties of personalists. There are different varieties of impersonalists. And they have their distinctions from each other. And even amongst themselves, it's not uncommon that those who are members of a particular group of, shall we say, impersonalists, they're not very keen on some other group or other groups, and they may have some bad things to say. And of course we know about that amongst Vaishnavas. We've got the Sampradayas, and even I remember being one of the times many years ago, like 30 years ago, yes, plus or minus 30 years ago, we went to Sri Rangam in South India, Tamil Nadu, on parikrama. We stayed there a few days, and we met one of the local Sri Vaishnavas, a bit of a scholar and like one of the higher members there. And so we started talking to him just a little. He spoke English. And then we mentioned our line that, we're followers of Lord Chaitanya, but through Madhvacharya. Our line comes through Madhvacharya and then comes to Lord Chaitanya. So when I informed this gentleman that we are in the line of Madhvacharya, he became very critical of Madhvacharya. And he shouldn't be taken seriously like their hero, who is Ramanujacharya. But still, basically, there are 2 visions when you get down to it, the personalists and the impersonalists. And the personalists, of course, they engage in devotional service, and the impersonalists, they engage themselves, but not in devotional service, not directly, but they like to meditate or speculate, depends which path they're following within impersonalism. They like to meditate on the impersonal Brahman. Yeah. So let's have a look, see. Yeah. So, Srila Prabhupada, shall we have a little look? Yeah, okay, let's just have a look at the 4th paragraph, which is comparing some of the other chapters, but in terms, I mean, at least to some degree, in terms which are different from what, for example, we just mentioned 5 or 10 minutes ago or whatever. So, 4th paragraph, 2nd chapter. What does Krishna do? Explains the living entity that we're not our bodies, we're spirit souls. And the absolute truth is like the spirit whole. 7th chapter. We're part and parcel of the Supreme Whole, and we should transfer our attention to the Lord, to the whole. Yes, Maya Asakta Mana. Maya Asakta. The mind should become asakta, attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then 8th chapter, we have to think of Krishna when we leave our bodies. Then we'll go to him. Then the end of the 6th chapter, Prabhupada's moving around a little, end of the 6th chapter, that of all the yogis, because the first 6 chapters was about different types of yoga and yogis. So, at the end of the 6th chapter, the first 6 chapters having focused on yogis and yogas, Krishna makes it clear that of all yogis, the devotee is the best. So Prabhupada mentions, so in practically every chapter, the conclusion has been that one should be attached to the personal form of Krishna, for that's the highest spiritual realization. But as Prabhupada points out in the following paragraph, there are those who are not attached to Krishna. They can't appreciate the personal feature of the absolute truth. And of course we preach, we try to help them, but there's a limit to what you can do. There will always be some impersonalists. Just like Srila Prabhupada one time, Prabhupada was talking on a morning walk about how we want everyone to become Krishna conscious. We want everyone to go back to Godhead. And one devotee became a little confused. And he said, Prabhupada, if everyone becomes a devotee, what will happen to the material world? And Prabhupada answered, yes, that is our business, that is our mission, no more material world. But, Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. But then Prabhupada said, But don't worry, there will always be some fools and rascals. So there'll always, no matter how much we preach, there'll always be some materialists, and there'll always be some impersonalists. What can you do? So therefore, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, so factually, there are these two classes. And that's just basically, that's the fact. And so now Arjuna is trying to settle the question of which process is easier and which of the classes is most perfect. Yeah. Clarifying his own position, because he's a devotee, he's a personalist. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, this important question asked of Krishna by Arjuna will clarify the distinction between the impersonal and personal conceptions of the absolute truth. Yeah. Yes, okay. So we go on to verse number 2. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, those who fix their minds on my personal form and are always engaged in worshipping me with great and transcendental faith are considered by me to be most perfect. There you go. So Krishna gives a very clear answer, straight to the point. There's no doubt. And he's done that before in different ways. We mentioned that in chapters 3, 5, and 6, the same subject, same question has been raised in slightly different terms. But each time Krishna has clarified that personalism is better. Chapter 3, in verses 4 to 8, chapter 5, verses 2, 3, and 6, and chapter 6, in verses 1 and 2. It's not exactly, there's not a question there, but Krishna just explains it. And he'll do it again in the 18th chapter, verses 4 to 7, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Krishna will do it again, because in the 18th chapter he's summarizing the whole book. Right. So, so the point has been that until you really are liberated, I mean fully Krishna conscious, then you have to engage the body. You have to engage it. Because if you don't engage the body, particularly in Krishna consciousness, it will engage you by force, and you will not be able to stop it. Even if you try to sit down and meditate, some impersonal process or other, particularly if you remember verse 5, chapter 3, verse 5, so emphatic on that point. So anyway, the thing is, interesting point, there has been, this conflict has been there. Arjuna is raising these questions because there is and has been, and it seems there will be, an ongoing conflict between the personalists and impersonalists. Even sometimes we talk about Madhvacharya. We mentioned the other day, maybe it was in a Bhagavatam class, but how Madhvacharya, he was big, powerful man physically. And he would just travel around India preaching. Yeah, again, and a lot of it was preaching against impersonalism. So whenever he would meet an impersonalist, like a preacher, he would often stop them and ask them, why are you cheating the people, and get on their case, and just even sometimes, physically shake them up. Yeah, because it's bad. It's bad. Yeah. Even in some places there, I suppose it's still going on. Actually, I'm not 100% sure. But maybe it is still, but definitely in the past, amongst some followers in some areas of South India, followers of Madhvacharya, on the appearance day of Shankaracharya, who is the big impersonalist leader. Now, we understand him to be Lord Shiva. He's got a mission from the Lord to preach impersonalism. It's not that he is really an impersonalist. It's just his duties ordered by the Lord to do that. But these people don't necessarily accept him like that. They take him to simply be the big impersonalist. So on his appearance day in some places, for many years, they have a competition. Who can speak the biggest insult to Shankaracharya? And you can use, not you, but they can use any bad language and just, really aggressive and even offensive. We don't do things like that. And there have been different incidents. One time, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was traveling on a train in India, and an impersonalist got in the same compartment, coupe. And so they're sitting there, not having much to do with each other. And one devotee at one station brought in some mangoes and gave them to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, who, if you remember, did not eat mangoes because of the incident in his childhood at 3 years of age when he ate an unoffered mango. He vowed to never eat mangoes again for the whole lifetime. And he never ate mangoes. He would always refuse them. So the devotee put the mangoes down, went away, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta just ignored them. And the impersonalist said, go on. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta explained, no, I am an offender. Because of my offense in the past, I don't eat mangoes. And the impersonalist was saying, oh, come on, you're just a child then. Oh, go on and have it. And then it became noticeable that the mangoes were overripe. They were a bit off. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta told the man, you eat them. The man was saying that, it doesn't matter, it's all one. So it doesn't matter about your vow. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta told him, no, you eat them. And the man smelt, oh, they're not so good. And he tried to avoid it. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, no, it doesn't matter. Ripe, unripe, overripe, it's all one. You eat them. And the man ate them. Oh, yes, okay. So anyway, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, in answer to Arjuna's question, Krishna clearly says that he who concentrates upon his personal form and who worships him with faith and devotion is to be considered most perfect in yoga. For one in such Krishna consciousness, there are no material activities, because everything's done for Krishna. A pure devotee is constantly engaged. Sometimes he chants, sometimes he hears or reads books about Krishna, or sometimes he cooks prasadam or goes to the marketplace to purchase something for Krishna, or sometimes he washes the temple or the dishes. Whatever he does not let a single moment pass without devoting his activities to Krishna. Such action is in full samadhi. And we have a special question here for those of you doing Bhakti Shastri, based on this verse, chapter 12, verse 2, but specifically focusing on another verse, Chaitanya Charitamrita Antya Leela, chapter 7, verse 24. Antya Leela 7:24, which reads, through the mercy of Ramananda Roy, well, this is Lord Chaitanya speaking, through the mercy of Ramananda Roy, I have understood that ecstatic love of Krishna is the highest goal of life, and that spontaneous love of Krishna is the highest perfection. So, we want you to cite a verse that was mentioned in class referring to perfection. This verse here we just read. Through whose mercy did Lord Chaitanya understand that ecstatic love of Krishna is the highest goal of life, and that spontaneous love of Krishna is the highest perfection? Who was it who very mercifully, at least Lord Chaitanya is putting it like that, sort of preached to Lord Chaitanya about these things? Who was it? Well, it was Ramananda Roy, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, so now we move on. The second subsection is verses 3, 4, and 5, and the subject there is, this is about impersonalists actually. The subject matter is, impersonalists can advance. They can, but it is very difficult. So let's read the verses 3 and 4. But those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons engaged in the welfare of all at last achieve me, Krishna says. And verse 5, for those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. All right, so let's have a look here. Verses 3 and 4. Those who fully worship the unmanifested, which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, unchanging, fixed and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, and they worship by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons engaged in the welfare of all at last achieve me. Maybe. maybe not also. So anyway, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada does make the point that they may ultimately achieve the same goal, Krishna. And he refers to chapter 7, verse 19, famous verse. Vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabhaha. After many lifetimes of cultivating knowledge, a person who's achieved real knowledge may surrender to him, Krishna, Vasudeva, knowing that Krishna is the cause of all causes and all that be. So when a person, as that verse, as Krishna says in that verse, Bahunam Janmanam Ante, after many births and deaths. So when such a person does, if the person, it is not guaranteed, it is by no means guaranteed, but if the person who's kind of on the impersonal Gyan side, they come to that point of understanding, right, must surrender to Krishna, then okay, they achieve Krishna, directly even achieve Krishna. But of course, he may not. If the person's engaged in an impersonal process, unless they get the association of devotees, very nice association. If they don't get such association, they're not going to come to Krishna. Maybe they'll merge in the impersonal Brahman, maybe, and maybe not. But they won't actually come to Krishna unless they get the association of the devotees. And so it may mean that they reach Krishna in the form of his impersonal Brahman. That's also a feature of Krishna. As is said that, well, a question is raised. What is Brahman? And what is Brahman realization? The impersonal realization of Krishna's effulgence and Krishna's energy. What are you realizing? And the answer is, you are realizing Krishna minus his form and minus his personality. That's what you're realizing. Whereas the realization of the Supersoul, you're realizing Krishna with his form, four-armed form, as we read last night. Arjuna saw the four-armed form. So the form is there. It's the Lord's form. But the personality is not there. Krishna, the cowherd boy of Vraja, the beloved of the devotees. This is a different feature. The Paramatma is a different feature. Okay. All right. So, okay, now verse 5. For those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested impersonal feature of the Supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied. Well, according to Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan, he puts forward the idea that Arjuna may object that if the impersonalists come to Krishna anyway, why make a big distinction between the personalists and the impersonalists if they all come to Krishna anyway? Because that's what Krishna just said. At last they achieve me. But the point is that the impersonal process is very troublesome. It's very difficult. Yeah. To make progress in that discipline is always difficult for those who are embodied, because we are persons, actually. We are persons. And impersonalism contradicts what we are spiritually. Plus, we've been living in material bodies as persons for a long time. For a long time we've been living as persons, confused persons, conditioned persons, but still persons. For how many lifetimes, who knows? Now we have to break that? This is really a challenge. It's a challenge. So Prabhupada makes some points about how it's a challenge. Well, let me just say, Baladev Vijayabhushan says that Krishna says, even though the devotees also endure difficulty in withdrawing the senses from objects other than me and engaging in the various angas of bhakti, they do not experience the same suffering as the impersonalists because of the dazzling attraction of my blissful form. And Prabhupada, to point out the difficulty of the impersonalists, in the third paragraph, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that, let's see, where is it? So it's the second beginning, the second sentence. The idea is that for the impersonalists the path is difficult. They have to understand the unmanifested representation of the Supreme through such Vedic literatures as the Upanishads, and they have to learn the language, understand the non-perceptual feelings, and realize all these processes. This is not very easy for a common man. But for the devotee it's different. And Prabhupada also further down, or just after what we just read right now, Prabhupada contrasts the position of the devotees, that the devotees engaged in devotional service under the guidance of the spiritual master, simply by offering obeisances to the deity, hearing the glories of the Lord, eating the prasadam, they realize the Lord very easily. So this is the point. And Prabhupada concludes the purport that thus the process of centering attention on the unmanifested, the inconceivable, which is beyond the approach of the senses, as already explained in this verse, should never be encouraged at any time, especially in this age. It is not advised by Lord Krishna. So now to really contrast it, to make it even more clear, vividly clear, Krishna speaks verses 6 and 7, that Krishna personally delivers his ananya bhaktas, his pure devotees, very quickly. Verses 6 and 7. But those who worship me, giving up all their activities unto me, and being devoted to me without deviation, engaged in devotional service, and always meditating upon me, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Pritha, For them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. So he says me. He's being emphatic. How many times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times me. And then for them I am the swift deliverer. So by his mercy, he is the swift deliverer. And Prabhupada makes the point in the second paragraph of the purport. Prabhupada makes the point there that, let's see, where is it? That's a good question. Where is it? Yes, okay. Oh, sorry, it's the fourth paragraph, excuse me. Prabhupada quotes the Varaha Purana, and Prabhupada then explains, the purport of this verse is that a devotee does not need to practice Ashtanga Yoga in order to transfer his soul to the spiritual planets. In other words, he himself will make the transfer. He'll do the yoga, and then he will transfer himself. Prabhupada continues that the responsibility is taken by the Supreme Lord himself. He clearly states that he himself becomes the deliverer. A child is completely cared for by his parents, and thus his position is secure. Similarly, a devotee does not need to endeavor to transfer himself by yoga practice to other planets. Rather, the Supreme Lord, by his great mercy, comes at once, riding on his bird carrier Garuda, and at once delivers the devotee from material existence. Yeah, and Prabhupada goes on, just straight after that, to explain that, if you're dropped in the middle of the ocean, it doesn't matter if you're Olympic Games gold medalist multiple times in swimming. If you're dropped in the middle of the ocean, you've had it. You are finished unless a rescuer comes. And this is what is happening here, that if someone comes and picks him up from the water, then he's easily rescued. Similarly, the Lord picks up the devotee from this material existence. One simply has to practice the easy process of Krishna consciousness and fully engage himself in devotional service. Yeah. Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan says that Krishna says, not after a long time, but very quickly, I bring them to my dham, since I am not able to bear delay in meeting them. Therefore I come, and putting them on the shoulders of Garuda, bring them to my dham. Yes. And this is out of affection. This is not through some mechanical process, press the right button and things click into place, something like that on the material level. This is because of the personal relationship. The personal relationship develops through the devotee's practice of devotional service and through the devotee cultivating appreciation of Krishna. How wonderful is Krishna? And gratitude towards Krishna, that, oh, what Krishna is doing for me, or what Krishna is not doing for me. The devotee feeling appreciative, very grateful of the mercy of the Lord. The devotee surrenders wholeheartedly, and Krishna, seeing the sincere devotee, even just a simple person, doesn't have to be some big expert on anything, but just trying from the heart to render service to please the Lord and the spiritual master and the devotees like that, then Krishna's heart becomes touched. And Krishna feels, let me take this person out of material life and bring them back so I can have their association. Just like, let me close by telling you one little thing. Giriraj Maharaj told me that Prabhupada said to him, as I recall, a question was raised that there is a rule somewhere that we shouldn't circumambulate the deity when the curtains are closed. When the curtains are closed. Yeah. So that was the question to Srila Prabhupada. We shouldn't circumambulate the temple and chant. Why? That's the question. And Prabhupada answered, because Krishna may feel frustrated that he cannot see his devotee. He knows his devotee is there, but he cannot see him. He may feel bad for that. Yes. So it's personal. It's very personal. And it's very deep in its personalness. This is pure devotional service, which is the subject of this chapter. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.